For those of you who have watched and witnessed higher education for the past 20 years or so, and for those of you who have been at Morgan for 6 years, our convocation speaker for this morning really needs no introduction, but I feel honored and privileged to do so. He is a great American educator whom has a long and remarkable record of accomplishments and well over 30 years of experience in higher education, administration, and leadership. Our speaker this morning earned a BS in political science and an MS in education from Tuskegee University in Tuskegee, Alabama, a Master of Education degree in Educational Planning and Administration from Harvard University, and a doctorate in Education in Administration, Planning, and Social Policy, also from Harvard University. He has held a number of important posts in higher education, including Vice President for University Outreach and Associate Provost at Auburn University in Alabama, Associate Provost at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, and Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin Colleges and the University of Wisconsin Extension, which was his immediate position prior to coming to Morgan. He has authored 2 books and more than 20 articles in scholarly journals and has received many honors for his scholarship and administrative leadership, including being named one of the nation's top 100 leaders in higher education by the American Education Association. Since coming to Morgan in July 1st of 2010, our speaker has established an extraordinary record of success, including record enrollment increases, receipt of the university's largest research contract, the launch of major initiatives to improve customer service, continual improvement of the technology infrastructure on campus, introduction of Morgan's first online degree programs, significant expansion of the study abroad opportunities for Morgan students, and an increase in our international students at Morgan, and new construction on campus valued at over $234 million. What is most remarkable about our convocation speaker is not just his outstanding record of achievement, but also the character that he has brought to the presidency of the institution. A character shaped by the intangibles of his background. He grew up with 10 siblings on a sharecropper farm outside the small town of McKinley, Alabama. And through hard work, tenacity, and encouragement of his father and his teachers, he became the first person in his family to attend and graduate from college. Ever reminded of his humble beginnings and the aid given to him along the way, he is a president who has an unwavering devotion to student success and student welfare, and he is strongly committed to openness, transparency, and fairness that lets all of our students know from the beginning that Morgan can change and shape their lives. He comes to you this morning as one who considers his work at Morgan not as a job, but as a calling. Ladies and gentlemen, faculty, staff, and students, members of our freshman class, please join me in welcoming Morgan's 10th president, Dr. David Wilson, to deliver our Convocation address. Let us welcome him.
Good morning. It really took a lot to sit there and listen to those words of introduction, Dr. Gibson. I thank you very much for those very, very kind words. But truly a good morning to all of you, to Regent Draper, to Regent Wilkerson, to Regent Reeds, to all of my distinguished colleagues here at Morgan on the faculty, the administration, and the staff, to our incredible alumni spread all over the world, ladies and gentlemen of the student body, to our friends of Morgan State University, and most of all, to the members of the freshman class of 2016. I truly welcome all of you to the fall 2016 Matriculation Convocation here at Morgan State University. This is a very exciting time to be at Morgan. To our incoming freshmen in particular, let me simply say that I hope you will savor this moment. I hope you will enjoy it. I hope you will take full advantage of your matriculation here at Morgan, because without a doubt, many persons, known and unknown to you, have worked and sacrificed so much to give you this life-changing opportunity, and I implore you, I beg you to take full advantage of it. I pray this morning that you will see this moment as a time when your lives take on the appearance of an uncharted ocean of possibilities. I pray this morning that you will utilize this opportunity here at Morgan to make new friends. I pray that you will learn from our extraordinary faculty and that you will use your Morgan experience to actualize your highest potential. You have chosen in Morgan an institution that is clearly on the move. You have chosen an institution that has produced some of the most impressive leaders in our society, and you have chosen an institution that, as you just heard, was recently named a national treasure, the only university in the nation to be so recognized. The bottom line is that you have chosen well. I want to use today's time-honored ceremony to share a brief but poignant message with you. Now, you know, when I was in grade school, Regent Draper, way back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, we jokingly spoke of the 3 R's. We spoke of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Well, today, I want to put before you a different set of R's as you matriculate here at Morgan. I put before you remembrance, reflection, and rehearsal. These 3 themes will constitute the sum and the substance of my remarks today. And I'll say a bit about each one. So let me start my remarks this morning by reminding you that next year, 2017, will celebrate the 150th anniversary of Morgan State University. Thus, it is fitting that we consciously this morning, that we pause and that we reflect upon our humble beginnings and that we reflect on the noble purposes that continue to animate our work here at Morgan almost 150 years after our founding. Since its inception in 1867, Morgan has been a sacred space and a designated place set aside for a particular and distinctive purpose. We are first and foremost a learning community comprised of extraordinary faculty, dedicated staff, impressive students who have certainly come here for different reasons. But faith and fate, as it were, have brought us together in this place and in this moment in time for one particular purpose, and that purpose is to discover. And by that I mean discovering new things about ourselves and about others, discovering new areas of intellectual inquiry, discovering our place in the world, and discovering how we might effectively make meaningful and personally fulfilling contributions to the world by embracing our distinctive and divine purpose and by preparing for dynamic citizenship in an increasingly competitive and interdependent world. So whether you are an incoming freshman, whether you are a continuing student, whether you are a transfer student, a graduate student, or a faculty or staff, we're all here today for that singular purpose. And it is an important underlying cause that binds us all, each to each other. It is also a timeless cause that goes to the core of why Morgan State University was created in the first place, how we have arrived at this precise moment, and why we must continue to vigorously and rigorously and strategically chart our growth and our development well into the future for the next 150 years. So let me first talk about these first two R's, with purpose in mind. Let me start with remembrance and reflection. Now, I want to start by asking you to clear your heads. Just clear your heads for a few minutes and go with me. I want you to go with me for a few minutes on a journey. This will be a brief journey, a journey through time, and a brief journey through history. I want you to go with me this morning through a painful, yes, painful, yet familiar and divisive period in our nation's history. I want you to go with me this morning through a period when educational opportunities for African Americans were scarce, and when our fledgling republic and its lofty democratic principles were severely put to the test, just as they are being severely put to the test today. I want to begin our historical journey in the turbulent decade of the mid-19th century. And I want to flash back to the year 1850. Now, this is the year, 1850, when the United States enacted the very, very controversial Fugitive Slave Act. Now, as strange as it may seem, this was a moment in history just 166 years ago, when slavery was commonly regarded as an immutable fact of life that simply reflected the so-called natural order of things. In fact, there were many who observed at the time that the right to hold slaves in bondage was safeguarded by the United States Constitution itself. And Dean Keels, there were others who believed that this right was sanctioned by God. And so in support of this claim, this notorious Fugitive Act was enacted by Congress and supported by then President Millard Fillmore as a legal means to disrupt and to contain the flow of runaway slaves fleeing the southern slave-holding states, including Maryland, and taking up residence in the northern states and in Canada. The geographical dividing line between America's free and slave-holding states at the time was the Mason-Dixon line. So let me be clear. Prior to 1850, if a fugitive slave was fortunate enough to get north of the Mason-Dixon line, he or she could live free and could start their lives anew. Now, I want you to be mindful this morning that this draconian Fugitive Slave Act imposed steep, very steep penalties on slaves who attempted to escape bondage, and especially on those conscientious citizens, both black and white, who tried to aid the slaves and to abet them. In effect, Congress criminalized the compassionate aiding and abetting of fugitive slaves. And the Mason-Dixon line, for all intent and purposes, was essentially erased. Now slaves could henceforth be hunted anywhere in the United States. I want you to clear your heads because I'm going someplace with this. And if fugitive slaves were caught anywhere during this time, south of Canada, they could be recaptured and extradited back to their owners, who were legally allowed to impose the most brutal punishments for their transgressions. Now, in addition, this act provided financial incentives for those who would assist in the recapture and the extradition of these fugitives whose only crime was their yearning to be free. Let me quickly add that not all Americans at the time supported this federal legislation. Indeed, many, many freedom-loving citizens openly proclaimed that they had no intention to obey it. In faraway Boston, Massachusetts at the time, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the widely perceived moral voice of the nation, he condemned this nefarious legislation as, quote, the most detestable law ever enacted by a civilized society. But Emerson was certainly not alone. On the 4th of July, that strident abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison, he protested by burning both the Fugitive Slave Act itself and by burning the United States Constitution on the steps of the Boston courthouse. Well, of course, that led to mass protests throughout the nation. Mass protests were staged as more and more Americans joined the cause to uphold the notion that Black lives mattered and that America should live up to its most cherished democratic values and its principles. These brave activists, whose heads were blooded but unbowed, put American democracy on trial, and they were determined to change the course of human history forever. And so as I continue on this historical journey, in addition to Garrison and Ralph Waldo Emerson, I want to introduce to some and reintroduce to others Mrs. Harriet Beecher Stowe, who was a relatively unknown white housewife and mother who would at that time enter the political arena in a big way. So Harriet Beecher Stowe decided to take to the pen as her way to protest the enactment and the strict enforcement of this Fugitive Slave Act. So what did she do? Well, she wrote a novel. She wrote a book. And this was a protest novel. It was not just any book. A protest novel called Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was published in 1853, and it went on to become a national bestseller. In this book, her sensitive depiction and condemnation of the evils and the brutality of slavery touched so many hearts and won thousands of citizens over to the abolitionist cause. And in this way, Harriet Beecher Stowe realized her purpose. And her purpose was to add her voice to the chorus of anti-slavery advocates who sought to bring legalized slavery to an end by peaceful means. God bless Harriet Beecher Stowe. Next along this journey, let me introduce you to one of her contemporaries, a relatively unknown African-American man, Samuel Green. For students, I want you to take note of that name. Write it down, Samuel Green, because for the next 5 to 7 minutes, you're going to hear it a lot. Samuel Green was born a slave here in Maryland, and he eventually educated himself, and he purchased his freedom, and at that time, he was an aspiring preacher, and he was a teacher of the gospel. Samuel Green. Samuel Green was adamantly opposed to slavery, and he successfully assisted his son to flee to Canada in open defiance of the Fugitive Slave Act. Samuel Green and his family lived in Dorchester County, Maryland. But then things went wrong, horribly wrong, for Samuel Green. In 1857, 10 years before the founding of Morgan State University, Samuel Green was accused of aiding the escape of his son and of other fugitive slaves at a time when Maryland's pro-slavery statutes and the dreaded Fugitive Slave Act were in full force. And so Samuel Green was arrested here in Maryland. He was brought to trial here in Maryland, and he was promptly sentenced to 10 years in prison. And what exactly was Samuel Green's crime? Well, according to the historical record, he was charged with, quote unquote, knowingly having in his possession a certain abolition pamphlet called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, I want you just to reflect for a moment on what I just said. I want you to grasp the gravity and the significance of this event. Samuel Green, a free and educated man, was punished for being in the possession of a book. It was a book being read by thousands of readers throughout the nation, but in the hands of Samuel Green, it was deemed to be a dangerous weapon. Not a gun, but a book. But fortunately, Samuel Green's story does not end there. Samuel Green spent 5 years in a Baltimore penitentiary from 1857 until 1862. And he was later released from jail on one condition, and that condition was that he had to leave the state of Maryland. And he left immediately. But at the end of the Civil War, 3 years later, Samuel Green returned to the state of Maryland. And this is when the story really becomes interesting, because after returning to Maryland, Samuel Green collaborated, Regent Draper, with his fellow ministers and with members of the Methodist Episcopal Church to establish the Seminary Biblical Institute. And that school, ladies and gentlemen, went on to become our beloved Morgan State University. God bless Samuel Green. God bless Samuel Green. Now, it is not known to me at this point whether Harriet Beecher Stowe and Samuel Green ever met or were even aware of one another. But that is entirely beside the point this morning. What we do know, and what we can safely assume, is that they shared an intellectual and a spiritual community, and that was the cause of abolition, and that they wanted to plant a seed that would grow an institution in perpetuity, and that seed is Maryland's public urban research university, an historically black institution. And today, this institution has an enrollment of nearly 8,000 students whose collective economic and educational impact extends around the world. Yes, our impact began with Samuel Green and his colleagues, but that impact must continue with each of you. I submit to you this morning that our success could not have been possible here at Morgan without the struggles and sacrifices of men and women like Harriet Beecher Stowe and Samuel Green, who stood up for what was right, who spoke truth to power, and who laid the foundations for a greater America, all the while by calling us to the highest reaches of our national character. You see, this is something that the sentencing judge and Samuel Green's enemies did not predict. They tried to extinguish his fire for justice. They wanted to bury him, but lo and behold, he turned out to be a powerful seed, a seed that was pregnant with all kinds of possibilities, and a seed that was destined to bear abundant fruit forever. What I'm simply saying this morning is that I'm making the case that Stowe and Green and their contemporaries, blacks and whites and people of all religious persuasions, those who stood up for social justice and those who stood up for educational opportunities, these are the individuals that should be warmly remembered. But more than that, I'm contending that our task is not to place them on some sort of psychological or moral pedestals. No, on the contrary, I think we pay proper homage to them by understanding and approaching our educational pursuits in the broader context of what is going on today in our nation and what is going on in our time. After all, if there was any greatness in Samuel Green, in Harriet Beecher Stowe, in Ralph Waldo Emerson, Garrison, if there was any greatness in any of these forebearers, it was because there was goodness in them. And so I want Morgan students to utilize your Morgan experience as the continuation or perhaps the beginning of a cultivated process of reflection Many of you have been given this precious opportunity to retreat from the so-called daily grind. You've been given an opportunity to retreat to an intellectual zone where you are encouraged to think deeply about your purpose, about your existence, and you are encouraged to discover the true meaning of your lives. That is essentially what college is for. It's a functional place. It is a sacred space where you feel entirely free to set the trajectory of your life, aided by dedicated and challenging professors who want nothing more than what is best for you, and they expect nothing more than what is best from you. And here I'm reminded of the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, who reminds us of the importance of the second R, reflection. He says, you know, the function of education is to teach one to think deeply and to think critically. Intelligence, he says, plus character. That is the true goal of a college education. Now, this is valuable counsel and a call to maturity to those of you who are entering and re-entering this dynamic learning institution. Because if Dr. King was right, and I think he was, we need you to use your talent, use your time and your treasure here at Morgan wisely, and we need you to stay in touch with those innermost desires and ambitions as you formulate your educational goals. This practice of reflection should certainly be a vital part of your Morgan experience, because in the end, the circumference of your life, the circle, the totality of your life, cannot be rightly drawn, if you will, until the center is set. Well, we want you to find that center here at Morgan, and we want you to find that purpose here at Morgan. And so finally, as I come to a close, I want to say a word or two about the third R, rehearsal. Now, I began with the premise that college life should prepare you for a world that you will inherit when you leave us. And therefore, I want you to use your time here as a virtual dress rehearsal for the roles that you will assume as enlightened citizens and as adult lifelong learners. You know, just a few weeks ago, I had the honor and the privilege to participate in a student-initiated peace and unity rally here on campus. And as many of you can attest, it was a profoundly moving event spurred on by some of Morgan's finest student leaders. It was an occasion for our students to speak out and voice their opposition to recent events in our city and throughout our nation. And there they were, hundreds of them in earnest, offering their full-throated intention to stand in opposition to the forces of hatred and retrogression and ignorance and bigotry and greed and pessimism and apathy. They stood proudly in opposition to those forces that threaten our democracy and undermine and restrict the humanistic development of our nation. I could not have been more proud of them. This was a fine example of the effective use of our rights and privileges as American citizens. This rally was a testament to their courage and their compassion that they can and they will and they must shape the future destiny of America. And so rather than wait until after graduation, these students openly declared their ambitions to be a force for good in the world. And they rehearsed for the types of roles that they will have to play when the curtain on college opens and is over. And they are prepared to receive their diplomas and take center stage.
And so in conclusion, I suggest to you that these 3 R's, remembrance, reflection, and rehearsal, are the hallmarks of a legitimate Morgan experience. I want you to have both roots and wings. I want you to recall our humble but noble past. I want you to learn from the experiences of our ancestors, and I want you to remember what they stood for. I want you to reach deep within yourselves, and I want you to reflect on what is most meaningful to you and to determine the type of world that you want to help bring into existence. And finally, I want you to think about your Morgan experience as a quintessential rehearsal. You have arrived at the right place, and you must now firmly grasp this opportunity. Let our battle truly be carpe diem, seize today, onward and upward. The world is yours to discover in its fullest. Be faithful and be diligent. And just as night follows day, the universe will slowly but surely reveal the secrets to you, and the universe will then light a path to the attainment of your dreams. And so, looking back on the life and times of Samuel Green, I can't help but believe that he would be smiling this morning on a gathering such as this. I can imagine Samuel Green looking out at this sea of faces, your faces, and marveling how far we have come since those dark days when the pursuit of knowledge was deemed a crime, and when warm-hearted and right-minded and high-minded people sacrificed so much to expand the boundaries of educational opportunity and to call on the nation to right its wrongs. Samuel Green would be proud. I can imagine Samuel Green visiting our campus and witnessing its growth and expansion and seeing all of you studying in our Richardson Library, a state-of-the-art facility. Being a man of the cloth, I think Samuel Green would enjoy fine fellowship today with some of our distinguished alumni clergy, such as Bishop John Bryant and Regent Reverend Dr. Francis Murphy Draper. I think Samuel Green would say, wow, look at my Morgan today. The institution that I helped to shape graduated the Chief Judge, Judge Robert Bell, of the highest court in Maryland, that same state that sent me to prison. I also think Samuel Green would delight in listening to our outstanding Morgan State University choir, which has traveled all over the world as goodwill ambassadors. I believe Samuel Green would join us in celebrating the prolific career of our former Dean of Engineering, Dr. Eugene Deloach, who is retiring after 3 decades of leadership and service. And I believe Samuel Green would welcome the opportunity to break bread with our dedicated and committed faculty and staff who have given so much to grow this institution over the decades. And beyond a shadow of a doubt, I know full well that he would applaud the accomplishments of our outstanding students and the promise that you have, because you brought honor and national visibility to his purpose, which was to establish one of the greatest institutions in the nation. I believe when all is said and done, that Samuel Green and the men and women who forged the Centenary Biblical Institute, that is now Morgan State University, would see our 21st century university as the fruit of their labor and a vindication of their highest hopes. And so my fellow Morganites, students in particular, on the eve of our 150th anniversary, I welcome all of you to Morgan State University, a place where remembrance, reflection, and rehearsal are in full bloom, a place where hard work pays off, a place where potential is realized, a place where dreams ultimately come true, and a place where you can and you must discover your purpose. Have a great year. Thank you.